Salisbury, Connecticut, a colonial town coveted for the beauty of its rivers, mountains, and fertile lands, and soon after for the quality and bounty of its iron ore. Perched on a hillside for over 200 years, this house bore witness to the transformation from quintessential pastoral American landscape to the fiery, belching industrial revolution born in its own front yard. Within its walls, one family's history has been lovingly preserved, a testament through the ages to the ingenuity and dedication of those who founded, served, and literally built America.
The history of the Holley family is really the history of the American dream. Here was a family that came over as immigrants early in the process, British immigrants, who were seeking new opportunities, and they started as basic farming, agricultural, families. And gradually, generation by generation, through hard work, through diligence, through frugality, they made it.
One was a commissioner on the construction of the Erie Canal. One was the first president of Transylvania University in Kentucky. One was a governor of Connecticut. One was an industrialist here locally. One was an abolitionist. One became a great engineer.
That's the American dream. That's the American story. And there are quite a few of those in our history, but none that we have so much information on through the generations and who clearly had a dramatic impact like this one did.
Alexander Lyman Holley was born in 1832, the fourth generation of Holleys to live in Salisbury, Connecticut. He carried on a long-standing family tradition and dedicated himself to the iron industry. By far among all of the Holleys, his contribution would soar to the greatest heights.
He was brilliant in the whole iron field. I mean, the kinds of things that he knew about Bessemer's process. And he went to England and not only worked with Bessemer, but he also improved Bessemer's system and brought it back here to the United States. When you credit him with the first 10 of the Bessemer furnaces that were in this country, he made a tremendous contribution. I don't think it would have gotten started nearly as quickly or maybe as efficiently if it hadn't been for him.
It changed our country because we started making steel in large quantities and cheaply. We were able to extend the railroads and create a transcontinental railroad by 1869. We started building bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge in 1883. New York City, you had to put a steel skeleton inside in order to create skyscrapers. That was all steel. The whole country went steel crazy. That's what really allowed for the westward expansion and the creation of the Gilded Age. It's just amazing that this whole change, this dramatic shift in American history was all caused by this one guy who grew up right here in this town.
The Holley family story begins in 1751 Connecticut with the birth of Luther Holley, great-grandfather of Alexander Lyman. When Luther was just 11 years old, unbeknownst to him, his future was beginning to take shape just 10 miles to the north.
In 1762, a guy who's pretty well known in American history by the name of Ethan Allen came back to town. He was always looking for opportunities to make money. He knew that there were no furnaces here at that time. In fact, there were no furnaces in all of Connecticut. And he put together a team that allowed for the building of the furnace.
The furnace faithfully served the infant republic throughout the Revolutionary War. When other furnaces had fallen to the British, the Salisbury furnace blazed day and night, forging 800 cannon altogether, nearly half of all cannon made during the war.
The beauty of those cannon, even though some of them took a little adjusting to shoot, was that there's no record of any of them breaking when they were fired, which again is a credit to the quality of work that was being done and also to the iron ore.
Commended for dutiful service by George Washington, Salisbury was anointed Arsenal of the Revolution. By 1799, peace had returned. In a fateful move, Luther Holley bought 1,800 acres of land in Salisbury, including the Ethan Allen iron furnace.
Luther wanted something better. The iron business was booming at that time. Everybody wanted it. And obviously, since the best iron was made here in Salisbury due to the ore, well, if you have a chance to get in early in the game, well, a smart, ambitious man is going to take that, and he did.
Abundant natural resources, including ore and limestone deposits, water to power the mills, and ample wood turned into charcoal to feed forging fires, made the region well suited to take the lead in iron production.
Luther Holley was instrumental in getting the iron business really rolling here in terms of changing from the wartime things that were made in the Revolution into tools and functional things that were really needed in the area.
Finally, having made his mark manufacturing farming implements, nails, and other household products in high demand for a growing nation, Luther Holley passed the torch to his sons.
Thy Hollies, brothers, shall they be forgot? Who shall be named if they're remembered not? The vigorous offshoots from a sturdy stem, where will you find a brotherhood like them? John Pierpont, poet, 1851.
A lot of the people who became prominent in those days, anywhere in the colonies, saw a very definite progression to duty in life. When you didn't have any money, your duty was to your family, improve yourself. Once you got a certain wealth, you were essentially supposed to dedicate yourself to serving others, to public service.
Myron Holley proved himself a dutiful servant on the most ambitious engineering project of his day.
The Erie Canal was a really brilliant scheme that would connect the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. It required a tremendous amount of forethought and building and work and money to do this using the waterways that already existed. Myron Holley became a commissioner on the construction of the Erie Canal. It was a very responsible job that involved supervising the construction, making sure everyone was being paid.
The Erie Canal opened the West to the emigration of people, goods, and services, and redefined the American frontier.
Myron was greatly appreciated and very honored. There was one small village on the canal. They decided to change the name of that village to Holley.
After returning to regular civilian life, Myron became a vocal opponent of slavery. His passion was passed to his daughter, Sally Holley, who became an ardent abolitionist and ultimately founded the Holley School, a school for freed slaves in Lottsburg, Virginia.
Horace was a son of Luther Holley, but it soon became apparent that he would make a splendid clergyman. Even before the age of 30, he was called to be the minister of the Hollis Street Church in Boston.
When word traveled through the country that he was one of the most eloquent pastors that ever graced the Boston pulpit, notice was taken by the likes of Henry Clay and other influential citizens of Kentucky looking to raise the esteem of their struggling university.
He was called by a fledgling university, Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, to come and be their first president. It was to be the Harvard of the South.
Due to Holley's genius for organization, By 1827, in just 8 short years, the university boasted academic, law, and medical schools and conferred nearly 700 degrees. At the same time, farther north, his brother Orville was making his imprint on American popular culture.
He became the publisher of the Troy Sentinel, the newspaper, in Troy, New York. An anonymous person gave him a copy of A Visit from St. Nicholas. We know it better as The Night Before Christmas, which, upon reading, he decided was a wonderful poem. He was the one who first printed The Night Before Christmas in the Troy Sentinel in December of 1823.
But perhaps the most lasting contribution to the town of Salisbury would come from John Milton Holley, the firstborn son of Luther, though he never even left his home in Salisbury.
It's remarkable that the Holley family owes so much of its prominence to the wealth it achieved during the heyday of the iron industry here in Salisbury, and yet it was really only one generation, John Milton's generation, that was most heavily involved in iron making.
The Holley family of Salisbury did a great deal in terms of developing this area in terms of iron during the Industrial Revolution and even before and after the Industrial Revolution.
By 1830, John M. Holley served as the first president and part owner of the Salisbury Iron Company. The company held 3 blast furnaces, some half-dozen forges, totaling 18 fires. In 1 year, the fires produced 1,000 tons of pig iron and 450 tons of refined bar, used to make screws, chain cable, and railroad car wheels. The company employed 215 men, with an estimated 600 dependents among them. The once pastoral town was now an industrial inferno, with furnace fires glowing in the night sky. With the landscape so changed, John Milton added his stamp, building a home befitting his hard-earned station in life.
The house is just up the hill from the furnace. It was within sight and sound and smell of this blast furnace. He was making a statement, I think, in a way, of the temple on the hill. There was no question that this home belonged to the boss.
By the time John Milton Holley really took over this house, the United States had changed. We were a new country. We emulated ancient Greece, ideas of democracy. So how did he redo the house? In what's called the federal style, classical revival. He made it into something that represented the United States.
4 generations of Holleys would live in the home long after the furnace fires died, devotedly protecting the memory of their forefathers who had shaped industry in America. In keeping with family tradition, John Milton passed the ironworks to his son, Alexander Hamilton Holley.
Alexander Hamilton Holley saw earlier than most how the iron industry was changing in the United States.
The furnace that was in Lakeville that the Holleys operated eventually closed down, mainly because it was a smaller furnace, like the one up on Mount Riga, and it got to a point where it wasn't producing as well, and bigger furnaces started, and more efficient furnaces started coming in.
Every once in a while, an iron furnace of that generation has to be completely dismantled and rebuilt. You have to clean out accumulations. So he used an opportunity and he said, you know, maybe it's time to go in another direction. We'll build a new business in making pocket knives, because in those days, everybody carried a pocket knife. I mean, you needed it for everything, you know, sharpening pencils. You needed a penknife or something like that for sharpening the quill. And they went for it. And it created a company, the Holley Manufacturing Company, that lasted for over 70 years. Alexander Hamilton Holley understood, like his father, the importance of the railroad in transporting goods and in making money, and the lack of an east-west line was just as glaring in the 1850s as it was in the 1830s. Alexander took up the cause and worked very, very hard to bring the railroad here to Lakeville. And ultimately, it led Alexander Hamilton Holley to be heavily involved in Connecticut politics, because one went hand in hand with the other in those days. He became the lieutenant governor of Connecticut and then ultimately governor of Connecticut.
Though John Milton did not live to see his son's many accomplishments, Alexander Hamilton Holley lived knowing he had fulfilled his father's ambitions. He rose to prominence as governor of Connecticut. He revived Holley industry, and though it would take another 20 years, he finally brought the railroad to Salisbury. Maria Holley, half-sister to Alexander Hamilton and daughter of John Milton, assumed the role of family memory keeper and guardian of the house.
Maria Holley was a very proper lady. She was a woman of great faith. She was a very active member of the Salisbury Congregational Church. I don't think Maria was a woman of great adventure. I think it was very important for her to have a lovely home and to be a faithful wife and a good mother.
Oh, how I love my home. Every spot about it is dear to me, and never has it looked so charming as it does this spring. Each old tree, each flower, each blade of grass. I love them all. Maria Holley, May 6, 1844.
She was very, very connected with her family. Our collection of letters that we have in our possession is extraordinary. Apparently, Maria wrote every morning for 2 or 3 or even 4 hours. She was the center of the web and kept everyone else informed of what was going on.
At the age of 24, Maria Holley fell madly in love with and was engaged to Edwin Williams, having found that my dear friend has become entwined with every fiber of my heart.
On the night of Maria's wedding, she took her diamond engagement ring and she etched into the window in her bedroom the words, "Home, sweet, sweet home." M.H.W., Maria Holley Williams, June 1847. It was her wedding day, or apparently very close to her wedding day.
Sadly, in the end, Edwin was not the man she had hoped for. He drank and had violent mood swings.
And I'm sure when she married him, she knew that she would go where he was, whither thou goest. And so she went to Brooklyn to live with him. But within 2 or 3 years, she was back here. And I don't think she was sad about that, because she did always love this home. So she ended up back in the place that she loved.
The Holley Williams home stayed in the family for 2 more generations, passing from Maria to her son Hubert, and then on to his daughter Margaret. Margaret was the last occupant of the family home, and she lovingly preserved each and every artifact left in her care until the day she died in 1971.
So from 1808 to 1971, the same family was in this house. I don't think that happens very often anymore. But when you have a house that these particular people occupied, and you have the vast fund of information about them, you really can imagine them in this house. You can read in their letters and their diaries about how they were feeling, what they were wearing, who came to call, what their everyday life was like. And it really makes history come alive.
But there's also an ongoing thread as you go through this entire family, and you look at Luther Holley, and you look at John Milton Holley, and you look at Governor Holley, and then you look at his son, who was responsible for bringing steel, really, the Bessemer process to this country. There's something very special there that carries through that whole family. It's pretty hard not to have admiration for a family like this and all the kinds of things that they did.
As a middle school history teacher in this small town, I often deal with students who aren't sure of their place in the world, and they figure they come from a small town. What impact can I possibly have on the world? And I always tell them the story of the Holleys and how they made it, and how this one family in this little tiny town had an effect on the entire nation that was significant, and they can too. So this is a story of inspiration for all kids and for all of us.